We've got a special treat for you right now. Brand new book out. And this is great, by the way, just in time for Father's Day or for Mother's Day. Hey, if there's a mom out there that's a huge baseball fan, you can pick it up this weekend. They'll love it. She'll love it. So will the dads. It's called True, the 4 Seasons of Jackie Robinson. Now, with us right now, via Zoom is the author of the book, New York Times bestselling author, Kostya Kennedy. Kostya, great to have you on the show here in El Paso, and congratulations on the book. How are you?
I'm doing well. I appreciate it, Stephen. Good to be with you tonight.
Well, I'll tell you what, you picked a subject that I think is so just still to this day, such a great topic, a great name to discuss in Jackie Robinson. And this being the 75th anniversary of Jackie breaking the color barrier. You tell me, Kostya, how long have you been working on a project like this and really putting all this together?
Well, so it's sort of been floating around in my alleged head for some time. During my time at Sports Illustrated, I did a few sort of pieces and things around Jackie. And about 8-9 years ago, I did a piece on Rachel Robinson, his widow. And that was when I guess it started moving into more of a reality into my mind, that I felt there was a news story to be told and a different way of looking at it. And then the past couple of years has been when I've really been focused on it, really reporting it and really writing it over the past couple of years.
I guess the toughest part for you when you put this together is, well, there's a lot of interesting parts of this book, True, the 4 Seasons of Jackie Robinson. First off, picking the 4 years that you decided to concentrate on and going on those seasons. So specifically for those people that are, getting ready to pick up the copy of the book, part 1 is the spring of 1946. Part 2, then the summer of 1949. Part 3, the autumn of 56, and part 4, the winter of 1972. Was it difficult trying to come up with which years specifically from those 4 seasons you were going to really focus and base the book on?
Well, it was, so the 4 seasons, just to be clear, though, they're those actual seasons, and then as you're kind of alluding, but just to hammer it home kind of, it's also metaphorically the spring, summer, autumn, and winter of Jackie's public and athletic life. So I knew that I wanted to have sort of distinct periods, that the years needed to be different enough in a way. They had to represent a different time in his evolution as a man, as a baseball player, as well as sort of the evolution of the local and larger environment around him. So I had that, Steve, as sort of a premise going in. And I sort of early on felt and realized that I think 1946 had been, certainly it's known that was when he played for the Montreal Royals, but I felt it was underreported, even for all the work that's been done on Robinson. And it really was such a crucial year. Of course, the year that we recognize him integrating baseball with the major leagues in 1947, that's as it should be. But in terms of sort of on the ground, what he was doing, he was kind of integrating baseball really in 1946, when he was the only black player, except for a couple of weeks when he had a black teammate, in an all-white international league with a top major league, top minor league. So it started off with 1946 as sort of a jumping off point to get myself rolling on those 4 years.
And one of the nice things about 46 was, and as you read the book, you'll understand this, fans in Montreal loved Jackie. I mean, they really did. He was a hero over there. And as tough as it was breaking into Major League Baseball the following year in Brooklyn, I think the Robinsons really, especially from reading the book, Kostya, enjoyed their time out in Montreal in that 46 season.
No question. There was certainly racism exists in Canada, of course, but the sort of black-white divide that was especially prevalent in our country in those years wasn't really there in 1946. It was more, the tension was more around French English speaking and religious tension. So it was just less of a thing. It wasn't as big of a deal. And exactly as you're saying, they were welcomed, and it gave them sort of a respite. It gave them a warming hut. It's kind of the analogy I use for what was to come, because during that year they did play a lot of games in the States. There was only Montreal and Toronto that were actually in Canada. So they were in Buffalo, Baltimore. They came down to Louisville for the minor league World Series, the Little World Series that year. So they got exposure, as well as, of course, in spring training, to some of what was to come. But they also had a place where they were a little bit protected from some of the resistance to what he was trying to do. And it was also a way, last thing on this, is to get him used to the celebrity. Yeah. He'd been a well-known football player, but it was nothing like this, to go out and in Montreal or wherever he was and have, I mean, they had big crowds. They had 15 to 20,000 people coming, not like major leagues, but big crowds. A lot of Black Canadians, African Americans coming around to see him at his game. So it was beginning to get a taste of what was to come.
And in that World Series against Louisville, he was treated really harsh by the fans and just had a bad experience in Louisville in general. So when he goes back to Montreal, fans, I guess, had heard about that, and they made sure that they returned the favor when Louisville was coming up, right?
Yeah, that was the big thing. And those fans were a little like, they were polite fans, a little like maybe a St. Louis crowd today or something like that. They didn't really boo, but they heard about what had happened to Jackie in the first 3 games in Louisville. And this was 1946 in the South. There were segregated stands. There was a lot of resistance. Jackie didn't play that well in it. And when he came back up, those fans in Montreal booed every Louisville Colonel that came up. And Jackie said he took a little solace from that, or took a little support from knowing they kind of had his back.
Kostya Kennedy with us here. The book, True, The 4 Seasons of Jackie Robinson. We're discussing it with the New York Times bestselling author here on Sports Talk. How difficult was it for you when you started to put the research together for that 46 season in Montreal, since probably very few people, if any, are still alive from that time that could give you firsthand accounts? How do you go about putting all of that together and piecing it together for the book?
So there were some people still alive and are still alive. And I was lucky enough to speak to them. So, maybe they were 12, 15 in 1946, that kind of age. And if you were at that age and interested at all in sports or just in general, you were aware of this happening, right? So there were people who really knew about going to the games. There was one person, the sports radio personality named Mitch Melnick in Montreal, and his mother, Mitzi, was 15 years old that summer. She's alive and sharp, and actually had a picture she had taken in 1946 there. And there were a few others. There were people in the Black community who'd gone to the Black church where he went and could remember him the way kids did. So I had that, Steve, as a start. There's a lot of newspapers, and I was fortunate. I don't speak French, but I was fortunate to have some people who could help translate the French, as well as there were English language newspapers. So there was a lot. I looked at contemporary books, and it's a big sort of, you cast a huge net and try to find what you can pull out.
Summer of 49 is the second season that you look at, and at that point, would you say that's really when Jackie started to just transform himself into somebody that wasn't just the person who broke the color barrier in baseball, but arguably you could look at that 49 season and say it was the best of his career, and it was probably the best in baseball at that time?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, he was a good player in 47. He won Rookie of the Year. He was a very solid player in 48. But 49, which was also the first year when he decided, I'm not going to take it anymore, so to speak. His first 2 seasons, he had sort of turned the other cheek, as had been talked about. And even though Robinson was hit with pitches more than anybody else in baseball those 2 years, he just picked himself up, run down to first. In 1949, he returned to being the sort of fiery player that he had been in the Negro Leagues, when a teammate said Robinson is up to his neck in every game, and was really aggressive, really loud, really into it. And it transformed him to be exactly as you said. He wins MVP that year. He's basically, by every measure, if you use WAR statistics from today and everything, he led both leagues in WAR. He was basically the best player alive. And he actually, that probably was his peak year. 53 was also a huge statistical year. There's just a little core there Of course, Jackie started a little late because of segregation in the war, so he's a little older when he came in.
Yeah.
But there's about a 5-year stretch when he's just putting up, Hall of Fame bona fide numbers. I think people sometimes forget what a great player he was at his peak.
You're right. And really what a great team the Dodgers were. People also forget Dodgers Yankees had so many meetings in the World Series over about a 7 or 8 year stretch. It seemed like that was the norm. Those were the two best teams in baseball. Brooklyn built it up and were just dominating the National League. Yankees had their great teams in the AL. And, these two, they were regulars in the World Series. And yet by 49, Kostya, not every team in baseball had fully integrated at that point. There were still teams that had not been able to break the color barrier themselves.
Yeah, no, there were many teams that had not at that point. It was not until 1959 when the Red Sox became the last team to integrate. And in 49, there was really very few black players in the league. They were coming up onto the Dodgers. They were coming onto the Giants, the Indians, the Braves. Most of the really good teams in those years were the teams that had integrated. The Yankees were the one exception, a team that was pretty slow to integrate. They had Elston Howard, but they didn't really bring black players onto their team as part of the team, and they still continued to have success. Otherwise, it was mainly the team that did integrate that had more success.
As Jackie started to fight back, and what I mean by that is he wasn't afraid to go after players that had gone after him those first couple of seasons, when Branch Rickey finally said, okay, now you can take your shot and do that. Was Jackie the kind of player that always commanded all that respect inside his own clubhouse? We know what he was like to the baseball world, but what about as a teammate? Was he one that just everybody on that club just respected for what, what he meant to not just the game, but obviously to the African-American world when it came to breaking the barrier?
You use the word respect, and I think that just on a pure athletic standpoint, he was such a good player, even on a team, and you alluded to how good the Dodgers were that had Duke Snider, Pee Wee Reese, and then Roy Campanella. Had some really, Carl Furillo, a lot of really good players. But he was an outstanding player, so that breeds respect. And the simple pressure of not only people who are, resistant to what he's doing, but even the supporters. So African-American newspapers are saying, when Jackie comes to bat, he represents all of us. Right? That's a lot to have on your shoulders. And ball players and professional athletes respect that. So the respect, this guy's going up there with all that weight, all those expectations, all the negative saying everything, and he's still performing at that high level. He had a huge amount of respect. He wasn't sort of, a happy-go-lucky guy that everybody loved walking in, but he was respected uniformly and had a core of really good, close friends.
As a ball player, about as intense and fiery an individual on the field as you're going to find, right?
Yep, absolutely. And he actually, the Enos Slaughter was a player from the South who Robinson had a little bit of a sort of a rub up against in his first year. But he would always say Slaughter was another guy like that. And Robinson would say, we might not see the eye to eye on something, but he played the way I play. And he was he played the game right. Robinson played super hard, as did Pee Wee Reese in a different kind of way. And that was a big part of what made the Dodgers so good.
We're joined by Kostya Kennedy. He's got his new book out, True, the 4 Seasons of Jackie Robinson. We've talked about the first 2, and now we move to the autumn of 1956, which was Jackie's last year in baseball with the Brooklyn Dodgers. There's a lot of places you could have gone on this particular part of the book, but I like the fact that you went with really his last go around in baseball and what it was like, especially as rumors started to circulate about the potential move to the West Coast. And you tell me, when you started, really going into 56, Kostya, did Jackie know that was going to be the end for him, or did he think he still had a couple of years left to go?
I think some point in that season, he started to realize it was time. That year, he was already, even coming into that year, he'd taken a little bit of a pay cut. 1955, which is a well-known year in baseball history, and certainly for Dodgers fans, the one year they beat the Yankees in the World Series. But it was a tough year personally, statistically, on the field for for Robinson. He'd gained a lot of weight and he had various health issues. And he sort of took it upon himself to lose a little of that weight, refocus. And in 56, he really had a very solid, strong, integral year for the Dodgers. Not at the peak level that he was, certainly not, but a player who, without whom they would not have gone to the World Series as they did. But as the year went on, he also was having certain issues with management. He had now begun to look at a life beyond baseball, explore what might happen. It became kind of clear to him that that was it, and that he was going to be somewhere else come 1957.
I think the toughest part is that he was coming off that World Series win, and they had been to the series so many times, and again in 1956. I wonder how difficult it is to know that you're still on a team that is in the middle of a dynasty run. One World Series win to prove, but so many trips that, the Dodgers, they dominated the National League for such a long period. They just weren't able to get by the Yankees, which was obviously their arch enemies.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing that might get overlooked. It was so good. They went to 6 World Series in 10 years, in the 10 years Jackie was there. But it's funny, and there was also talk around the Dodgers then, Steve, about them moving to LA. That was very much in the air. It happened 1 year after Jackie retired. So there was stuff going on in there. But Jackie never looked back the way you think, the way some athletes sort of seem to have a little remorse. I could have pushed it another year. I could have had it. He didn't seem to have that. He pretty much embraced his second life pretty fully afterward, and felt that he had gotten everything he was going to get out of the game. So he seemed at peace with that.
He's traded to the New York Giants and then ultimately decides to retire rather than play for the Giants. How tough a decision was that? And do you think Jackie would have maybe even given it a little more thought? Because as tough as it was to play for the hated Giants, hey, if I still have something left to show and they sent me to my division rivals, hey, I can now team up with Willie Mays and come out and show everybody that there's still something left in number 47.
Yeah, I don't. It's what you're saying makes a lot of sense, but I just don't think Jackie really looked at it that way. When that trade happened, Jackie had already actually taken a job with Chock full of Nuts as a VP, and he was making the same amount of money that he made as a ball player. Remember, ball player salaries were perfectly good, but they were nothing like, we weren't crowning kings the way we are today. Mm-hmm. So he got a job that was, paid as well. He'd given his word to do this, and he promised Look magazine that he would reveal this information. He was going to retire and take this job in their pages exclusively. He was paid for that. So when the trade happened, it was between the time when he'd taken the job and before he'd gone public with it. So he didn't immediately say, hey, I'm not going to go to the Giants. He actually got a telegram from Willie Mays saying, welcome to the team.
Wow.
But then when that Look magazine article was coming out, he said, listen, I can't go. He wrote to Horace Stoneham saying it's nothing to do with your organization. Horace Stoneham was the owner of the Giants then. I just am not ready to, I've gotten a better offer. And he seems to be, that seems to be honest with the way he embraced that second life. He seemed to really be ready for it.
It's just so funny because you see number 42 in a Giant uniform and it would be a mind blower, but yeah. It just also goes to show you that in 1956 or 57, chock full of nuts and baseball was on par. Money wasn't like it is today. And a lot of these guys had jobs in the off season when they were done playing their baseball year. And if a company is going to offer you money and you're not going to have to go through the grind of put your body through the rigors of playing baseball, that probably was pretty appealing to somebody that was already in his late 30s at the time.
Exactly. I mean, he had a job, he had some security, it was an easier life. He thought he might have a little more time with his kids and all of that kind of stuff. To your point, when in the height of his career, Jackie had different jobs in the off season, just as everybody else did. Basically, he sold TVs for an appliance store in Queens for a while. Other guys worked at hardware stores or at car dealerships. So it was a very different world in terms of the money that was coming in.
Kostya Kennedy with us, the book True, the 4 seasons of Jackie Robinson here on Sports Talk as we continue. So the final season, which is really his last few months before he passes away. By the time of the winter of 1972, Jackie was not in good health at all. It deteriorated. Even though he was only in his early 50s, Kostya, he went through some personal tragedies, and his own health was really something that he was having a very hard time with.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating year. And this is the year that I sort of came upon in doing my research. He did die in 1972, as you say. That was in late October. And earlier in that year, very early on, he'd gone to the funeral of Gil Hodges, a teammate of his with the Dodgers, who also died very young. And at that point, he saw a bunch of his old teammates who he hadn't seen for a while, Don Newcomb, Joe Black, others. And they sort of brought him back into the game. Jackie had been out of baseball, been distanced. He hadn't been going to the old timers games. He hadn't been involved in any way. And they got him sort of back involved. He went out and did something with the Dodgers. He ends up being in the World Series in October, right just before he died. And throughout that whole year, even though exactly as you say, he wasn't failing health at just the age of 53, he couldn't see very well. He had circulation issues, but he was extremely active. He continued. They started a low-income housing construction company. He went out to Chicago to do something for the Rainbow Push Coalition. He was out and about and being extremely active right until the last week of his life.
It's remarkable, and you look at his lasting legacy. Here we are, some 50 years later, and you still see the impact he's had on baseball. Not just Jackie Robinson Day when everybody wears the number 42, but ultimately just the legacy he's left on the sport and on life and on I think just American history. That's the best way to put it. Not to mention Rachel Robinson's still alive, and she's able, along with the rest of the family, to just let that legacy continue.
Yeah, she's still with us. She'll turn 100 in July. And what she did by starting the Jackie Robinson Foundation in 1973, right after Jackie died, was a remarkable thing. It sent hundreds of kids to school, paid them, mentored them. What she and Sharon and David, the kids, have done is keep that alive and protect it. You know, there's a reason, Steve, why we haven't seen a Jackie Robinson bobblehead day put out by MLB. I think there's some knockoffs out there, and that's because Rachel Robinson said, no, I don't really see him shaking around his head like that. So she's protected his legacy, furthered his mission in a really important way.
Last question before we wrap things up with you, Kostya. We appreciate the time so much. You've been terrific. For people that pick up a copy of True, the 4 Seasons of Jackie Robinson, especially after listening to our conversation, what do you feel like they will get most after they get done reading the book?
I hope they're going to see a different side of Robinson that's maybe known. He was very adaptive to his situation, but he was also extremely consistent and focused on what he was trying to do. The other thing is his baseball playing and what he meant to people as a player is not separated from all the other work he did when he worked with Dr. King and everything outside of baseball. He was really, he touched people in a emotional way to see him in his height, the way he played and how he went about things. So those are a couple of things that certainly stayed with me in digging into the book, and I hope will stay with people.
Well said. Great job, Kostya. We appreciate the time. Again, True, the 4 Seasons of Jackie Robinson. Pick it up, folks. Get it now for moms in time for Mother's Day, or you can even get it for the moms and then pass it to the dads for Father's Day here coming up next month. Appreciate it once again, and have a great weekend.
Great to be on with you, Steve. Really enjoyed it. You too.